My name is Clara Hayes. I am 42 years old. I have designed several of the skyscrapers that touch the Boston skyline, and my own construction company brings them to life. People know me as a successful architect and businesswoman. They think my success story is one of bricks, mortar, steel, and glass. But in reality, my story begins on a cold evening, in a hospital room, with a betrayal that broke me to my core, just so I could reforge myself into steel. This morning, as I sat in my chair in my massive boardroom on the 48th floor of Boston's most expensive commercial complex, it was pouring rain outside. Raindrops lashed against the large glass windows. Across the long mahogany table sat three people, their heads bowed. They were the Prestons of Boston. My former father-in-law, Charles Preston, my former mother-in-law, Eleanor, and my ex-husband, Richard. The same people who once thought they were the gods of this city. Today, they had come here to beg my company for a lifeline, just to save themselves from bankruptcy. I looked at them. The wrinkles in their expensive suits were a testament to their shattered confidence. I felt no pity for them, nor was there any hatred left in me. I was simply settling the ledger. I keep track of things because when you build buildings, you have to account for every single inch and every single brick. Let me take you 15 years back, so you can understand that the distance between the people on either side of this table was not just about money, it was about humanity. I came from a very modest background. My father was a carpenter in South Boston. Growing up, I was familiar with the smell of sawdust and the calluses on my father's hands. He used to say, "Measure twice before you cut anything, because rushed decisions always cost you." Through sheer hard work, sleepless nights, and scholarships, I completed my degree in architecture. My world was very simple and honest. I met Richard at a charity gala where I was designing a small pavilion. He was the sole heir of the Preston family. They had old money, rubbed shoulders with the city's elite, and carried an arrogance that gave them the power to look down on everyone else. Richard was charming. He made me feel like he was different from his family's grandiosity. I thought he liked my simplicity. I thought he was a man who valued truth over glitz and glamour. He was my first love and my biggest mistake. We got married. But that marriage never became a home for me. The Preston family's massive mansion, with its marble floors that always felt cold, was like a golden cage to me. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, always introduced me as if I were some cheap decorative item kept in her expensive house. Every word of hers carried a kind of pity that was actually just cruelty in disguise. Whenever there was a party at the house, she would tell her high society friends with sweet poison that Richard chose Clara because he had a soft spot for helping the helpless poor thing. Her father is just a lowly carpenter. We gave her a new life. I stayed quiet. I thought I would win their hearts with my love. I turned a deaf ear to their taunts and focused on my work. I was trying my absolute best to be a good wife and a good daughter-in-law. Richard never took my side in all of this. He would just smile and brush it off. But the real storm hit when I got pregnant. I was expecting twins. A different kind of joy took over the Preston household, but that joy was entirely about their heir, not about my womb or my pain. What the Preston heir would look like, what color his room would be, which expensive boarding school he would go to, all of this was decided in advance. I had no importance. I was merely a vessel to bring their heir into the world. But life and fate have their own blueprints. My babies were born 2 months premature. Their birth weight was dangerously low, their tiny lungs were not fully developed, and they were put in the NICU right after birth. As a mother, it was the most terrifying, heart-wrenching moment of my life. I watched my 2 tiny babies, Leo and Maya, from behind the glass, surrounded by countless wires, tubes, and machines. The constant beeping of those machines numbed my mind. My heart beat for them every single second. I could not sleep at night. I just prayed and desperately wanted them to somehow pull through. On the third day, Charles and Eleanor came to the hospital. They looked at those fragile babies through the glass. Their faces showed no grandparently concern or pain. Instead, there was a strange disappointment and anger. It was as if they had bought a very expensive item and it turned out to be defective. Eleanor scrunched her nose, made a face, and said that these babies were a stain on the Preston family name. Never in our family have such weak, sick, and imperfect children been born. This must be the result of Clara's common blood. Charles looked at Richard and said with a chilling coldness, "Is this the future you want to give this family, Richard? These unwanted children will drag our ancestral pride through the mud. What will the world say? That the heirs of the Preston dynasty are surviving on machines." I stood there listening to all of this. My ears went numb. I felt like someone had plunged a dagger into my chest. I looked at Richard. I thought he would stop his father, yell at his mother. I thought he would step forward, hold my hand, and say that everything would be all right, that these were our children and we would save them together. But Richard said nothing. He just stood there, avoiding my gaze. Not once did he look toward those glass doors where his children were fighting for their breaths. That one moment told me that I had no husband and my children had no father. That night, as I sat beside my babies, Richard walked into the room. In a very calm, cold tone, he said that his parents were right. He could not take responsibility for these kids. He could not make anything a part of his family that was not absolutely perfect. He told me he would pay the hospital bills and I could leave whenever I wanted. He would send me a generous alimony check, but he had to end this marriage right here. I did not make a scene. I stopped crying. When you suddenly become both a mother and a father and your children are hanging between life and death, you do not have the time to cry over a broken heart. I looked Richard dead in the eye and said, "I do not want a single penny of your money. I just want my kids. You can leave." I spent the next 2 months in that hospital room and the NICU waiting area. I poured every last cent of my savings into them. When Leo and Maya were finally strong enough to be taken home, I brought them straight to my father's old cramped house, which had been empty since he passed away. The Preston family never looked back. They left me to fend for myself and sent over the divorce papers. On those winter nights, when heavy snow fell outside and the heater barely worked, I would wrap both my babies in a single blanket and hold them tight against my chest. I would look at them and promise myself that one day I would give these children every single happiness in the world they deserved. I would never let the shadow of the Preston name fall on them. I started working again. It was not easy for me. I took a job as a junior draftsman at a small construction firm. By day, I swallowed the dust of construction sites. Construction is a brutal business. It takes a lot of struggle for a woman to carve out her place among laborers, contractors, and suppliers. I would negotiate the rates for cement and steel, listen to people's curses and taunts, but my face remained hard as stone. At night, when my kids fell asleep, I would sit at my father's old desk and draft my own designs. I remember the times I would hold Maya's bottle with one hand to feed her and draw lines on a building's blueprint with the other. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. I had locked my emotions completely inside a vault. I only had one fire burning inside me, to prove to my children that they were not a stain, they were my pride. Slowly, I started my own small company. I began taking on small projects: the renovation of an old building, a small commercial store, an old warehouse. My work was impeccable. I never missed a deadline and my budget was always dead on. I started making a name for myself in the Boston construction market. People began to know me as Clara Hayes. Not Clara Preston, Clara Hayes. When I got my first major contract to design and build a large community center, it was the turning point of my life. I poured my soul into it. Within 5 years, Hayes Construction had laid a solid foundation in the city. As my children grew, my company grew with them. Leo and Maya turned out to be perfectly healthy and incredibly bright kids. The doctors had said they might have complications, but my love and their destiny changed everything. They topped their classes, played sports. Leo loved chess and Maya loved the water. Their smiling faces gave me the strength to work even harder every single day. Meanwhile, I never went out of my way to look for news about the Preston family. I never tried to find out if Richard had remarried. But when you become part of the same major business circle in a city, the news reaches you through the grapevine anyway. Charles Preston's arrogance had begun to dominate his decisions. He thought his name was enough. He ignored shifting market trends. He poured massive amounts of money into old, sinking real estate projects that had no future. Richard, who had spent his entire life coasting on his father's money and had no vision of his own, had absolutely no idea how to run a business. Their money was slowly drying up, but their pride remained untouched. They were still busy with their grand parties, expensive golf clubs, and European holidays, while the roots of their companies were hollowed out like termite-infested wood. I watched all of this in silence. I knew this building would collapse one day. As an architect, I know that when a building's foundation is weak, nothing can stop it from falling, no matter how expensive the paint you slap on it. Last year, the front page of Boston's biggest newspaper ran the story that Preston Holdings was drowning in massive debt. Several of their projects were half-finished, workers' wages were stalled, and the banks were preparing to seize their ancestral properties. No one in the market was willing to work with them because everyone knew they were a sinking ship, and Charles's ego would take anyone down with him. They had only one way out: to sell their biggest and last commercial property right in the heart of the city, just to avoid the stigma of bankruptcy and salvage whatever was left of their dignity. That is where my plan kicked in. I called my most trusted financier and legal team and gave them a task. I created a shell company, a name that was in no way linked to Hayes Construction or Clara Hayes. Through my lawyers, I struck a deal for that Preston Holdings property. Charles and Richard were in such desperate need of cash that they agreed to a price far below market value. They just needed liquidity by any means necessary, so the banks would not show up at their doorstep. They had absolutely no idea who the anonymous buyer really was. For the final signing of the deal, they were called to the boardroom of my own corporate office in this new building, which I had recently purchased. And now we come back to this morning. I was sitting in my chair inside the boardroom. The rain was coming down hard. In my hands was the file that contained the end of Preston Holdings and the ironclad documents of my new ownership. The sound of footsteps came from outside, and the doors opened. Charles, Eleanor, and Richard entered the room. All three looked exhausted, aged, and defeated. The glow on their faces, which used to come from looking down on others, was completely gone. They walked toward the table with their files, and then suddenly, their eyes fell on me. A silence fell over the room that was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The only sound was the rain outside. Charles's feet froze to the floor. Eleanor's face went as pale as if all the blood had been drained from her body. Richard looked at me as if he had seen a ghost, or perhaps his worst nightmare come to life. Without moving from my spot, keeping my eyes locked on their faces, I said in a very calm, authoritative voice, "Come in, Mr. Preston. Have a seat. We have been waiting for you." Charles tried to compose himself. In his trembling voice, his old arrogance made a futile attempt to return. He said, "What are you doing here, Clara? This meeting was supposed to be with the owner of the new investment firm." What business do contractors like you have in this boardroom? I smiled faintly, rested my fingers on the table, and said, I am that firm, Charles. I am Hayes Construction, and I am the anonymous buyer who is about to purchase your last shred of credibility for pennies on the dollar today. All three collapsed into their chairs as if someone had pulled the rug out from under them. Eleanor's eyes were wide with shock, her breathing heavy. Richard looked down in shame, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. The sheer terror, disbelief, and helplessness on their faces was the greatest reward for my 15 years of struggle. I opened the file and slid it toward them. I said, according to the documents of this deal, your final commercial complex now belongs to my company. You can sign this and save yourselves from the bank's debt. But this company of yours, this ancestral name you were so arrogant about, dies today, forever. Charles picked up the pen with shaking hands, but he could not write. That man, who had never even deigned to look at me, who thought he was the king of Boston, began begging in front of me today. He said, Clara, we are family. You cannot do this. We made some mistakes in business, but we are family. Please amend this deal a little. Give us a little more time, or let us remain at least a minor partner in this project. We have nothing else left. We have lost everything. Eleanor started crying too. Putting on a show of tears, she said, Clara, my child, Richard was your husband. We admit we made a terrible mistake back then. We were scared. Forgive us, daughter. You were always so kind-hearted. I looked at them. There was no anger in my eyes, no hatred, and no gloating pride of victory. Just a deep, frozen, icy calm. I said, family. Where was my family 15 years ago when I sat in that freezing hospital room, Eleanor? When my babies were borrowing breaths from the NICU machines. What did you call them, Charles? I remember perfectly well. You said they were unwanted. You said they were a stain on your family name, and you could not accept anything defective. Today, I want to tell you that those kids are 15 years old now. Leo is a junior national chess champion, and Maya is a state-level swimmer. They are growing into perfectly healthy, beautiful, and successful human beings. They were never unwanted, Charles. To me, they were always the most precious things in the world. If anything in this whole story was unwanted and defective, it was your arrogance, your hollow pride that has put you on the other side of this table today, sitting like beggars. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Richard gathered his courage. He looked at me, tears in his eyes. Maybe real, maybe fake. I did not care. He said, Clara, I am sorry. I was so scared back then. I could not go against my parents. I proved to be a terrible father. Just give me one chance. I want to meet Leo and Maya. I cut Richard off in a very professional, uncompromising tone. I said, you were not a terrible father, Richard. You were never a father at all. A father is someone who stands like a shield in front of his kids during a storm, not someone who runs away and leaves them to die in it. My children do not have a father. And you people are not sitting here begging for my mercy today because you have any remorse for what you did. You are begging because today I hold the power, the money, and the status that used to be your pride. But I am not sitting here for some ancient revenge. I am a businesswoman, and I am here strictly to do business. I checked my watch and pushed the pen a little closer to Charles. I said, you have exactly 2 minutes. You have 2 choices. Either you quietly sign these papers and walk out of here with the money that will save you from a bank's prison and allow you to live out the rest of your lives hiding in some small house, or I cancel this deal right now, and by tomorrow morning, you will be declared bankrupt in front of the entire city, and you will spend the rest of your lives making rounds in court. The choice is yours. Charles knew he had no other way out. With trembling hands, he signed the documents. Eleanor kept crying, and Richard just stared blankly at the table. When the final signature was done, I pulled the file back toward me, closed it, and stood up from my seat. I told my legal team to complete the remaining formalities. I turned to look at the three of them one last time and said, "The day you threw my children out of the house, you thought my story ended there. But the truth is, my story began that exact day. You can leave now. Your time in my building is up." I walked out of that boardroom. Behind me, the three of them sat amidst the rubble of their crumbling empire. I never looked back. I took the elevator down, got into my car, and started driving through the streets of Boston toward my home. The rain had stopped now, and faint rays of sunlight were piercing through the clouds. I had built this house with every single penny of my own hard work. As I pulled up outside the house, I saw Leo and Maya playing basketball in the driveway. The sound of their laughter echoed across the lawn. I turned off the engine and sat there for a while, just watching them. There were tears in my eyes, but they were not tears of pain. They were the tears of relief you get after winning a long, exhausting war. My children were safe, and I was not afraid of anything anymore. My name is Clara Hayes. 15 years ago, I was written out of a story because I was not perfect by their standards. So I wrote my own story, built my own empire. And today, in that empire, there is no room for the people who once called me and my children unwanted. This story is for anyone who has ever been considered weak, who was abandoned by their own people in their darkest hour, or who was repeatedly made to feel like they were worthless. Remember, when someone breaks you and throws you away, that is the exact moment you can rebuild yourself from scratch. You do not need to scream or seek revenge. Your silence, your relentless hard work, and your success are your loudest answer. If you liked my story and it inspired you in any way, please like this video. Share it with your friends and family. And yes, for more deep and touching stories like this, do not forget to subscribe to BookBite Studio. Do share your thoughts and similar life experiences in the comments. Thank you so much for watching BookBite Studio. Take care of yourselves.